Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. My name is Leanne Deleg, and I'm responsible for communications at Climate Outreach, and I will introduce my colleague George Marshall, as well as our partner Shailendra Yashwant in just a minute. I just had a look at the participant list, and it's really great to see people from across India joining us and across the world, and we're really delighted to have this opportunity to share with you the results of a very exciting project for us. And we hope you'll find it interesting and that it will inform your work. So just a few words to introduce Climate Outreach if you're not very familiar with us. We are a nonprofit. We're based in the UK, but work increasingly with partners around the world, as you can see today, working in India. And we specialize in climate change communication, specifically values-based communication. How do we communicate in ways that resonate with the values of people that we are trying to engage on climate change? And our team is made up of academics, social researchers, as well as communication specialists. So we're at that really interesting interface between research and practice. And conducting social research ourselves, but also, importantly, translating that into practice through training, practical guides, consultancy services. And our partner on this project is CANSA, Climate Action Network South Asia, which is part of the CAN International Network. CANSA is a coalition of over 160 civil society organizations from 8 countries in South Asia. And their goal is to promote equity and sustainable development in the design and development of an effective global strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and ensure its implementation. And so you will hear more about this project, but just basically in a nutshell, we have partnered on an exciting project, Global Narratives, with CANSA and CAN International. And it's really the first qualitative research in India to test and compare specific language around climate change and renewable energy. So really pioneering work, which we're really excited about working on. And Global Narratives, as you will see, introduces a new model of cooperative design, and George and Shai will tell you a little bit more about it. So just in terms of logistics, there is going to be a Q&A at the end of this session for about 15-20 minutes. So you are welcome to ask questions using the chat feature, which is on the right of your screen. You could just type a question in or a comment or thought at any time during the webinar, and I will be compiling them and then asking them. Hopefully we can get to all the questions that come in, and we will get to them at the end, but again, you're welcome to ask them throughout the webinar. So now, last but not least, I will introduce George and Shai, who will be sharing the project with you. So George is the co-founder and director of projects at Climate Outreach, and he has been really excited about this project and continues to be so, and it's always great to hear him talk about it. And Shai, who is the senior advisor at Climate Action Network Southeast Asia, and also the former program director at Greenpeace South Asia, has been working very closely with George since the beginning of this project, and will be able to give you some insight into how it's been working on this project in India. So now I will turn it over to George.
Am I live? Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. So we're going to have 2 parts to this presentation. The first part is talking about the actual the method for doing it, because that's important and pioneering, and hopefully some of the people on this call may be interested in replicating this in your own countries or in your own work. And then we'll talk specifically about the findings in India. If anybody is calling in and you can't hear us, and click call on computers, you can see. Right, so what we did, we've actually written a report on this. I'll give a link to that at the end. The process and the methodology of this project. Really, we're addressing a problem that the existing communications research is usually very expensive. It's beyond the means of any but the best funded organizations, or they need to get special funding for it. And as a result of that, we have a situation that there is very, very little research done into communications, especially the kind of research we want, which is finding the communications which works for people, that speaks to their values and their culture. There's very little about work that's been done outside the global north. In fact, actually, there's been very little done outside of the United States. I would reckon that maybe 80–90% of communications research has been done in the US, which is great, and it's very high quality work. But most countries, there has been no attempt to understand how we can talk about climate change in a way that speaks to their values, or even in their language. And part of the problem with existing communications research is the people who might use it don't do it. So the people who go out and do the communication, the people who run the organizations, or the scientists, or the government officials, or whoever speaks on it, are not finding out the communications research themselves. So what we're trying to do with the Global Narratives Project, a partnership we have with Climate Action Network International, is to address this with a new way of working, which involves training people on the ground to run the research themselves, but to run it to a high professional standard. In other words, that the research that's done on the work in India or anywhere that we run this project is as good as would be done with a professional communications consultancy, but with the added value that because it's being co-designed with the people who are going to use the language, that they are involved at every stage in terms of saying, what are we going to do with this? What do we need to know? And what do these findings really tell us? We in India and overall in our work, we are using a methodology that Climate Outreach has developed called narrative workshops. I'll explain those are a little different from conventional focus groups. They involve meetings of around usually 10 to 12 people in a room, running through a script, in every case the same script, testing with different audiences, what works and what does not work. But it's much more conversational than a normal focus group. We very strongly encourage people to have conversations with each other in the group. And what makes this particularly relevant, as Leanne was saying at the beginning, is that we're trying to ask people's values and identity. So, for example, in India, the first third of any of the workshops that we train people to run in India was asking, what do you care about? What's important to you? What makes India a good country? What makes you proud of being Indian? Before we even start talking about climate change. Because our evidence and the research shows strongly that climate change needs to speak to people's sense of identity and who they are. So before we talk about climate change, we have to understand that. And you'll see when we go into the findings that a lot of these are drawn on asking people, what does it mean to you to be Indian, or what makes you proud of who you are? When we ran the program, there were 5 stages. First part, just finding out what existing research had been done. I do hope we have some people on the call here who have been involved in some of the previous research. There's been some very good survey work done. Our friends at Yale University did a very large national survey. We read all of that and we tested all of our findings against that and built on it. So the first stage is looking at what's already been there. Our colleagues from India then attended a 2-day training workshop on how to run these narrative workshops, so that they could feel the confidence about going out and running them. They then went and did so, and we'll explain later on that they ran these narrative workshops across India. They then came together for another 2 days to evaluate it and to co-design the findings. And then myself and Shai, you'll hear from shortly, then went and we deconstructed those findings to draw out the conclusions. So it's very important to stress that this is cooperative, that this is co-design, and that the involvement of the partners is absolutely key. And these are our partners. We had 6 major partners within India. Then we had CANSA, which is the Climate Action Network South Asia. We wish to thank our colleagues in the Minor Foundation who funded this, who are certainly need to be listed amongst the partners, and of course Climate Action Network International, with whom we have been working on this overall vision of the Global Narratives Project. And I should say for that, we're going to concentrate on India today, but the vision is that this method of working with people on the ground, national partners in the country, to find language which speaks to the identity of that country is one that we would very much want to roll out to other countries. So this work in India was a pilot to say, can we do this and are the results good? And I think the answer to that is yes, we can, and yes, they are. And yes, now we can potentially do this in any country. So here is the team. who developed it. This was on the first day. Some people came and went from this group. This is basically the core team. You won't see Shai on this call, but he's a handsome man to the far right. And here's a little bit of what was happening. These are the people on the training. They're not just having cups of tea. They're practicing active listening. The feedback we had from participants was that this practice of just listening to what people said was extremely valuable for them. And actually quite a lot of the training involved practicing listening, asking a question and then not interrupting or contradicting, listening to it. They selected the narratives to test themselves. They then practiced a workshop themselves. They sat around, we ran them through, and then several of them went back to their organizations and ran the workshops again within their organizations, training up other people in the method of doing this kind of research. Unfortunately, we have a colleague here who is going to share this on a video, but we can't technically do that. So Shai will say a few words about the experience from his perspective, but just to say that the method of how we did this, and hopefully we can reproduce this in other places in other countries, is in a report which is on our website here. Thank you. Would you like to pass over to Shai?
Hi, Leanne. Can you hear me?
Very well.
Thank you, George. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I don't have a list of who is attending this conference, but I'm very excited. This is technically our official launch of this report. It's been 6 to 8 months in making already. I first want to echo what George has said, that this is really first of its kind research done in India. I know this because for last couple of years, as working with our various member organizations in CANSA, who are primarily focused on climate, have been struggling and looking for communication and language and narratives that will work with our audiences. I've had people coming up to me and expressing their frustration at the fact that we are cutting pasting Western slogans, and we are cutting pasting content and research and science and trying to communicate climate change, but it's not getting through. And which is like George said, he did a lot of desk research to see what is out there besides the surveys. We didn't find anything else. So yes, first of its kind, qualitative research. What we liked particularly and appreciated about this approach was that it wasn't as if Climate Outreach and CAN International came here with a set of narratives to test. They sent first set of narratives to us for our feedback. We took these narratives to the participants, participating organizations. They looked at and gave feedback on, plus added to the narratives, the set of narratives that we had brought on the table. This whole process, I would call it a participatory survey process. It's as much of cooperation is required, of course, but this whole participatory process helped us design this. When we started the project, George and everybody else on the team kept reminding us that this is a pilot, that this will evolve as we design it. And the input that we got from all our partners, and I think a big word of appreciation to all our participating organizations that actually went out and ran the narrative workshops with their audiences. And what an interesting set of audiences. I mean, young people. Thanks to IYCN, Center for Environmental Education, and even CEC, their main audiences, and therefore a large part of our survey is focused on young people, young professionals, youth, and students. And that's something that is an identified need as to what are the young people talking about and what is the language that will work for them. And meanwhile, Development Alternatives and INSEADA Change Alliance reached out to our rural audiences, which is where they work, and almost all of them are involved in development projects. and the connection between climate change and development for them is equally important, and for them to explore this. So uh, uh, the trainings helped, but in the end, it's the partners that played a very important role in going out, speaking to their audiences, bringing back that information and feeding us back. So it's a very involved. It was a very involved project, I must say. It required, everybody's involvement right from the start till that point where everybody came and fed us back the information that they had collected. Uh, Everybody reported back, has repeatedly said this, that what they have learned on this project has more value for their campaigning and communication, but also for them to help design their development projects. Yeah, and we will come to that bit in our findings when we talk about our findings. But for now, I think I really want to appreciate the role of partners besides this the unique design that George and his team brought here. And I'll stop there for now. Yeah. Thanks, George. Leanne,
You're welcome.
back to you, George.
I'm waiting for Leanne. Leanne, am I back on now? Am I on?
Yeah.
Yes, sorry, I was.
Oh, yes. Oh, sorry. Hello. Hello, everybody. Just before I explain what we found, just to really following up on what Shai said, we asked for all of the participants to give their feedback about what was useful. And something that they all said was that the actual process of sitting and listening to people was hugely useful for them in terms of informing their work, and that they'd never done this before. And to stress, I think that the nature of this project is really twofold. It's one is to find the answers of a language which works and doesn't work, and to test the language. But the second thing I think is to change the nature of relationship between the partner organizations and their audiences, and to listen. And something that this work can do is that it can provide a basis for going and speaking to people that one would never normally speak to. In other words, it can open a door to go and say, right, well, let's talk to these people who are normally opposed to what we do. And let's go and just ask them and listen to what they say. So, part two, what we found. Okay, I'm sure many of you on this call have been waiting for this. First thing to say is that there is a report. And the report we've written carefully and has been carefully designed to be accessible, easy for you to read, and so on. So really what we're doing is we're just going through some of the highlights of that, but there's really no alternative to reading the report, which will tell you all of the detail. Where did the workshops take place? Well, our 6 partner organizations organized 16 of these workshops. Each workshop was about 2 hours long. A total number of 154 participants were involved. 5 locations across North India. 2 cities, Delhi, Ahmedabad, but then also these rural locations. This is very important for us, but we had a mix of people, different backgrounds and different locations. We tried as far as possible to have a mix. It is very, very hard, I have to say, in a country with over 1 billion people to have a representative sample. And where we did decide and where it ended up that we had a lot more attention was on young people. But we did have a range of ages, we had very good gender balance, and we had a range of different backgrounds. Farmers, the local partners, the development partners, women's groups, students in particular, and also urban professional groups. We then cross-compared the results from these different discussion groups with these national level surveys, which had been done on a much larger scale. And the final findings had to correlate. In other words, they had to agree between our narrative workshops and the larger surveys. But actually they did. And we were finding things which were cutting across all of these different groups. So, but of course, there's a huge difference between middle-class students and rural farmers, say. But we were finding common threads emerging, which gives us the confidence that these findings are strong. So here are some general principles for what we found. First of all, I, as an outsider, as an English person, was very surprised and impressed to find that no one in any of the groups questioned that climate change was real, happening now, and caused by humans. That is very different from the situation we have certainly in many parts of the developed English-speaking world, where there is skepticism and there are people who don't think it's happening. There was none of that to be found either in our research or in the larger survey research. That means that we should not have to defend the science. We just say, yes, it's real, it's a reality, this is what's happening. And people are accepting that we are the cause for it. We need to speak locally. I mean, locally both in terms of sometimes very local, people's specific community, their specific village or their area. We need to be using language. This was something, most of the research we were doing was in English or in Hindi. We simply didn't have resources for drilling down into some of the local languages. India has over 100 languages. It's important that we try and find language which speaks to local languages, talks about local impacts, local issues. Clearly talking about polar bears or what happens in the Arctic is not relevant and should be largely avoided. Youth, very important. India now has the world's largest population, or the largest number of people under the age of 25 in the world. And the youth is a very, very large sector of the Indian society, and the one which is changing fast, and the future literally rests in their hands. So we were looking for messages that worked with youth. Pollution was the entry point. I'll touch on this again. But pollution was the point that people could really start a conversation, and therefore we recommend conversations focusing on pollution. Pollution, incidentally, being an awareness in both urban and rural areas. And in rural areas, the nature of the pollution might be somewhat different. It might be water pollution, say, rather than air pollution, but the awareness is still there. People's greatest concerns regarding impacts related to food and farmers. Every group, not just the farmers, but the urban groups too, expressed a great concern about the livelihood of farmers and even the mental health and well-being of farmers. So this was a strong area. Nature as well, people were very concerned about the impact of climate change on wildlife and on forests. And it's a general principle for all climate communications. Try and be positive. Just talking about how bad it is and serious does not capture people's attention. They need messages which are positive, how we can find solutions, how we can pull together, how we can deal with this. Often what's most interesting in research is trying to find what doesn't work. Generally speaking, the phrase we have in climate outreach is good communications is often not doing bad communications. In other words, it's trying to identify the things you really shouldn't do and making sure that doesn't happen. Here are some of the things we found which really didn't work. And this is complex. This is not a very straightforward situation of yes or no. It's usually about how things are done. Nobody liked language based on blame, which is very standard for campaign organizations, especially global environmental organizations. It's the fault of a government. It's the fault of the oil companies, the corporations. It's rich people. In none of our groups, even the more economically deprived groups, were people happy with this language. They were much more inclined to talk about the misuse of power. That's to say that these were people who had power or authority, and they had to use that properly and responsibly and not misuse it. People even talked about the misuse of power when it came to technology. Plane going over. But they were saying it's nothing inherently about cars, for example. It's about the kind of cars. It's the misuse of cars. Nobody mentioned coal as a major cause of climate change. When we asked people, what do you think is causing climate change? Very few people mentioned electricity generation. Most people thought it was caused by pollution or deforestation, which is partly true, but partly not. Therefore, we have to be careful. We cannot assume in campaigning in India that we can just run an anti-coal campaign and people will understand it. Nor can we assume that just talking about renewable energy, people make the connection between that and climate change, because they're not fully making the connection with electricity generation yet. We have to talk about multiple causes. The Modi government, and politically, and many northern NGOs similarly, have often demanded that the rich northern countries take action first and deliver aid to the less developed countries in response to climate change. Those narratives failed with the groups. People did not like them. And they said, no, India can do it. India can do it itself. We don't have to wait for other people to take action first. This relates to a sense of national pride. So talk about self-reliance. India can do it itself. India can be a leader regionally, but people did not like language which talked up India on the world stage. They didn't think that it was appropriate, or that India was yet in a position to do that. So talking about how India can lead the world didn't work well, but talking about how India could be a regional leader did. Finally, nobody in the groups talked about equality and justice. These are language which often appears in environmental campaigns, but did not appear in any of the groups. Nor did any of the language we tested using these words do particularly well. It suggests that language around climate justice is something which may be too politically charged for a general audience. We did find, though, that people were very prepared to talk about fairness, how it was not fair that rich people could turn up the air conditioning, but that poorer people would have to suffer from heat stroke. So fairness was there. Again, I think that plays into misuse of power. We looked particularly for language which was distinctly Indian. In other words, is a way of talking about climate change which is Indian, and so Indian that maybe it doesn't apply, but you couldn't use it in other countries. And here's what we found. Very interesting that talking about nature, I've given it a capital N there, but big N nature, talking about nature was applied in every single group. People said, we have lost respect for nature. We need to find this word respect appeared a lot for nature. By nature, they meant the living things in the world, but also air, forests, and water. So in a Western context, using language around nature often feels too, deep ecology or too environmentalist. In India, it's very strong. People were particularly alert to how climate change was affecting the nature that was tied in with their cultural and religious calendar. In other words, people had a very clear and strong sense of when the monsoon should come. Everybody mentioned the monsoon as a major concern, but the monsoon was not coming according to the time it should do, that a kite festival didn't have any wind because the wind wasn't happening, or that other festivals were related or tied into weather events, that things were out of sync. So this is a key opportunity to communicate in India, saying things are not the way they should be. Very strong sense of interconnectedness with each other and also with wider nature. The people had a strong national identity. When we said what makes you proud of India, they talked about togetherness, the fact that India is so diverse but it can pull together. So we need to find language which is about pulling together. People were critical of India. They said that it is not a perfect country, that it has a lot of problems, but they were all very clear that it's on a journey of betterment, of becoming better. So therefore, language saying India is a great country, India is the greatest country, people didn't like that. But they did like language about journeys, about the sense that through dealing with climate change, India is a part of its journey to being better. And people very much like language around self-reliance. So as we'll see, around renewables, people were particularly interested in language which talked about renewables replacing oil imports. In other words, that Indian energy can provide for Indian needs. I'm not going to read out this language here. You can have a little look. It's all in the report. But this is the kind of language which emerged in the course of the research that was tested in the groups. And we handed blocks of text to people in all of the groups, and we gave them a red pen and a green pen. And we said, mark the text you really like with a green pen. Mark the text you don't like with a red pen. It's a way for us to be able to tell across all of these very different groups what people liked. So this is a language which got a green pen. All of the people in different groups like this language. Language, as you can see in the first paragraph, about connection. In the second paragraph, a sense that things are wrong. that the world is out of balance. It's not how things should be, and that therefore we're going to take action to replace that natural balance. I'll give you just a couple of seconds to look at the screen, and then I'll show you the next one. Here is some more language which worked well and tested well. The first paragraph here, that we can pull together, that everybody, this is the idea again of using your power in the right way, that everybody has a part to play. People in India were very prepared to accept personal responsibility, showing our moral values through our actions. I might say many of these values are in various ways rested in traditional religions such as Hinduism and Buddhism, which are very strong in India, as we know. Islam too. So everybody playing their part, and then finally in the second paragraph here, you see language here about India being on a journey. Yeah, language around journeys. We've got a choice. We need to choose a cleaner path. And here you see we cannot wait for help to arrive from the West. We're in a unique position to take action. Again, this question of self-reliance, not waiting, moving forward. People really liked that language, by the way. So that's a clear indication. Right. I'll only be a few more minutes and then I'll pass over to Shai. I said pollution was very clearly a good entry point. There's a problem, though. When we ask people what do you think is causing climate change, people said pollution. The problem is they're thinking of visible pollution. So they're thinking of smog. In Delhi, for example, they were talking about people burning plastic or setting off firecrackers, things which cause horrible air pollution but are not major contributors to climate change. So we need to be careful with this pollution thing. We always need to make the links back to climate change, because a government could take action on air pollution and do nothing against the carbon emissions which cause climate change. The government is already very keen on supporting natural gas, for example, which would certainly contribute towards reducing carbon emissions, but not utterly remove fossil fuels. So we need to stress that there are different kinds of pollution, that carbon pollution is one of many, and that taking action on all of these pollutions is a way that can move forward against carbon pollution. I'll show you some language for that. Interestingly, we found that the word dirty received very strange and mixed responses from people. Some people really liked the use of the word in language, talking about dirty fossil fuels. Some people really hated it. I think it's clear that there's some issues around the use of the word dirty. And so it's better to talk about things being clean rather than things being dirty. So here's some kind of language which tested this. Burning oil is polluting and it's changing our weather. It's damaging health, and health was a major concern for people, and people really understood this. Pollution is damaging our health, and carbon pollution is changing our climate. In other words, we put these two things together, but we always make it clear that pollution does different things. For all of these things, it's time to move to clean natural energy. Right. Finally, renewables. We really wanted to look at renewables and how renewables are measured up in India. You know, the government in India is committed, is really actually genuinely a world leader on the promotion of renewables, especially solar power. Nobody in the groups were aware of that. There seems to be a real mismatch between not just the commitment, but the actual actions of the Indian government and the awareness of people. People like the idea of renewables. They like the idea that those reflect India's natural abundance. So talking about renewables being natural, remember again this nature word, was very strong. But people don't realize that energy generation plays such a big role in climate change. So when we say to people, what do you think of as solutions to climate change? People don't automatically think of renewables. So there's some missing parts and the links there that need to be made. And we can't assume that they're already there. When we asked people what they felt about renewables, everybody across all of the groups started talking about bad experiences of how their panels broke down, how things didn't work, how their solar water pump didn't work. Solar in particular has been around in India for a long time, actually. And people have a lot of experience of the earlier technologies and are skeptical about it. So we have a problem there, but actually the technology has moved much faster than people's experience of it. And people really need to be made aware of the fact that the technology is transforming rapidly and is actually at the cutting edge of new technology. So language which reflects this, the abundance of natural resources, the fact that it will meet our energy needs and never run out. The two key concerns for people with fossil fuels is that they were going to run out, and that they were imported. So the idea that renewable energy could come out of India and be generated by India was strong for people. The idea that it reflected the diversity of modern-day India was liked by people. Again, it goes to this idea of how diverse India is and how it has this sense of interconnectedness and togetherness. And communication should stress all of these different ways. So it's not just in the villages. Yes, it's in the villages. Yes, it's for large solar farms. Yes, it's in the cities. And people did like the idea that it was a way of distributing development and distributing income. This idea of taking control and creating local jobs worked well. Again, this is not blaming energy companies, but this is just saying that maybe this is all too one-sided and we need a different system which passes and distributes things wider. People did not like the centralization of power, not least because India has had some of the largest power cuts ever recorded in history. People are well aware of the vulnerabilities of having a centralized energy system, so decentralization makes sense to them. Thank you, and that's my presentation.
Thank you, George. Leanne, I think George has eaten into my time, but I will just keep this quick. I think the biggest insight from these findings that George has shared with you, and you will also, you can read it again all over in the report, downloadable link at the end of this, or there is a downloadable link up there. I think one big insight for all of us who in India who were working on this project was that how much our audiences don't know. They might be aware that climate change is happening, and like our findings clearly point out that they related to festivals, they related to annual happenings, yeah, that are out of this thing. But I think at the same time, I mean, on renewable energy, their personal experiences don't go beyond the solar panels and simple solar applications like solar torches and solar calculators came up a number of times. Just that this disconnect between what is happening in the field of renewable energy and what the real experience of people out there is and what their understanding is. The whole understanding there or lack of understanding of how coal plants cause climate change, yeah, how emissions from coal plants or burning oil, their very limited understanding of and this came as a big surprise that yes, localized phenomena are important for communication, etc., etc., but the lack of understanding of the global phenomenon of climate change, that came through as well. And I think all these are important pointers on how we, all of us who are in the business of communicating climate change and mitigation, adaptation, we may have to bolster our communication with some very basic information. Yeah, we might have to remove the polar bear, as this research suggests, but we might have to replace it with something to stress on the global aspect of climate change. Also, to make these connections between what causes climate change and how renewable energy or how reforestation can mitigate it. Yes, there is no surprises when almost all participants connected deforestation to climate change. That was not a surprise. That's an immediate experience. That's the communication out there as well. But at the same time, what was surprising was that the limited understanding of the role of renewable energy. So I think we've got some insights. We also have some indicators. I will once again stress what George has repeatedly said, that despite its limited scope and the numbers that we see there might not look, uh, a very good statistic, but it it's just the quality of research gives you a better understanding of how people are reacting to our messages and how what they understand, what they don't understand, and how we can improve our messaging. Yeah. So I'll stop there, George. Leanne?
Okay, well, thank you very much, George and Shai. Your talk is already sparking some questions and comments from
Good.
people we have online. So I've got a few here. I'll start with, did the research in India show anything different from climate communications research done in other countries?
Probably in 3 or 4 ways. The first thing was that the level of acceptance of the issue is exceptionally high in India, and the preparedness to accept shared responsibility is high. In none of the groups did anybody indulge in the kind of language which is very common in Britain or America of blaming someone else, or saying there's no point us doing anything because China is so much worse than us, or it's not my fault, it's their fault over there. Nobody did that, even when they were invited to do it. So I thought that was interesting. And I think also the specific cultural resonance, for me as an outsider, was extremely interesting about how people could be so clear and precise about when the monsoon is supposed to come, and how it's coming 2 weeks late is fascinating. Shai, do you have anything on this?
Um, I of course have not seen any other studies, but that is the question, right? If how does it compare to people's responses in other countries? Um, I have worked in Southeast Asia, and I could relate to some of the responses that we have seen, and this is outside of study, of course, but I could relate that a lot of what we have learned from the study could be very easily applicable in other South Asian countries, and especially in Southeast Asia, in Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh as well. So I think this was a very Asian response as well to the narratives that were presented. So that I can say, but I can't say the same from your own experience, George, on how audiences react in Europe or in the Western world. Yeah.
The only thing I would add to that is that the goal of the overall Global Narratives project, as we hope to roll it out to other countries, is to ask this question in every country. In other words, we are going to find, as we already found in this, that a number of the findings here are consistent in every country. There are some things in here we could ask, what are the things that are the same? Well, most of it is the same. But where it gets really interesting and important is the things that are different. Because that is the point where we can be most effective for communications, is the point where we are speaking so clearly and strongly to what makes somebody distinctively Indian. But they really, really hear this as something which is part and parcel of their lives. So that's always the question and challenge of the research, is that question you asked, Leanne, is can we find a way of talking here that is so distinctly Indian that they say, yes, this is my problem.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to get to at least 3 or 4 other questions.
Please, we'll be fast.
So, did you test narratives around the impact of climate change on economic growth? That India's economic development might be harmed by the negative impacts of climate change?
Shai, would you like to take that one?
No, I think we had very general language, but we did not specifically look at India's economic growth. But the whole talk about the journey and India's development, I think, was peppered over our different narratives that we shared. So yes, India's development was a big part of it, but it was from the development bit. Correct me if I'm wrong, George. It was never specifically from economic growth angle.
Can I say we well, there's two ways of looking at this. The first thing is that what we built into this method of research was really allowing the people in the groups to freely generate their own ideas. In other words, we're looking to see, if we ask people, what do you think the major impacts of climate change will be in India? We're looking to see how people respond. Nobody in any of the groups mentioned that climate change would negatively affect India's economic growth. So it was clearly not an issue which registered very strongly with the audiences, although I'm sure that there's some that it would. So that's very different from saying, do you think it will affect India's economic growth? It's actually saying, does that appear spontaneously in the conversations? No, it did not. Also, when we tested language about renewables and about the economic potential of renewables, it could generate this many jobs, some people liked it, but nobody loved it. And I think this is a finding consistent with other countries, that these big claims about how, say, shifting to renewables could generate, 1 million new jobs and so on. I think people hear a lot of these kinds of big claims from the government, and they kind of say, well, I'll believe it when I see it. And as yet, they're not seeing it for renewables. So.
Okay. Thank you, George. And again, lots of questions coming in, so we'll try and get as many as we can. I'll combine two. Did the research show any difference between rural and urban? And another person was asking between women and men.
Okay.
You take that, George.
Sure. I think the thing which was important to say about the urban people we interviewed is that many of them had their roots in the country. So when we were talking with students, for example, and we'd say, where are you from? Many of them were already from the country. That's the first thing to say. When, however, we talked to urban groups and rural groups, yes, there were differences. The primary difference actually was that the rural groups were much more strongly connected in with religious interpretation of their responsibility in what was happening. So they would be much more overt, for example, about their Hinduism. They would also interpret pollution much more in terms of their own experience. So, as I said before, pollution was a consistent thing that groups felt were forming it, but in the rural groups, for example, they'd say, yes, it's the pollution of the water, or it's the use of pesticides which is causing climate change. So I think what was happening in both the rural and the urban ones was a sense that we are destabilizing natural processes, but the way they understood it would be different. Of course, their actual experience of climate change is different too. Rural farming-dependent communities were deeply concerned about the effects on farming. The urban ones were concerned about the effects on air quality, say. But it was interesting to me that the connection there was quite strong. As I said, urban groups were very concerned about rural impacts, far more than I expected. But then India is a very rapidly urbanizing population. So the answer is that the biggest differences actually came down in large to education, I would say, more than location. And people's sense of personal economic power, probably more. So some of the better off rural people would be saying things consistent with the better off urban people. Women and men, well, the women were much more inclined to recognize the progress of women in India, which was interesting. So when we'd say, how is India better, they would be very keen to emphasize this. And one of our recommendations was that in all materials and communications, women should be present and prominent. Like, we should be showing women doing things, working in renewables, active in various ways, because this was clearly something important for people in the audiences. In terms of attitudes towards climate change, no, we did not notice a significant difference. Women were somewhat more inclined to be concerned with social impacts, but it wasn't very marked.
Okay, thank you, George. Did you learn anything about what messengers were most trusted when it came to climate change in India?
Again, I'd like to give Shai an opportunity on that. I can answer, but
what messengers?
Yes.
I really didn't get any insight on that. Did you, George?
No. No. We didn't get a clear. We got a very clear message that politicians were not trusted. That's not a. not a big surprise to anyone. In fact, one of the recommendations is that actually politicians should be removed. We tested a little bit of actually very mild language, which just mentioned something that the Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, has done. And immediately in the groups, 50% of people said they really liked it, and 50% of people said they hated it. And it was just a statement of what he'd done. It wasn't any opinion. So clearly, and many people said politics were what they didn't like. So the answer is, we know that, but no, we didn't get a clear messaging on that. We did look a little bit to see what the level of trust was of environmental organizations or the kind of people who might do the communication, and by and large we found it was okay. People in India have a reasonably good respect for what are called civil society organizations. But of course there we have to be careful because they were recruited by such organizations, so we can't be sure. But the answer is no, we can't say for certain this is the best communicator now.
Yeah, so it sounds like we need to do more research, George.
Definitely. Always.
Yes. Another question from somebody who says he ran some climate awareness workshops in, I'm probably not going to pronounce this right, but Maharashtra earlier this year. And one unexpected theme that emerged was that people saw this as an issue that unites the many different ethnic and cultural groups in India. Is this something that you saw in your research?
Shai.
Can you repeat that? Sorry, Leanne, I didn't get the last bit.
I'll repeat the question. From somebody who's run some climate awareness workshops in Maharashtra, which sorry, my Indian geography is not fantastic, but I'm assuming it's a part of India. Earlier this year, one unexpected theme that emerged during these climate awareness workshops was that the participants saw climate change as an issue that could unite the many different ethnic and cultural groups in India. And this person was wondering if this is also something that we saw.
No, not really. No, not at all, in fact. The language of togetherness keeps coming up, and it's a big indicator. Everybody keeps talking about and approving narratives that use the word together, that we can deal with the issue of climate change together. We can go on development together. But specifically bringing a set of people together, a group of people together or populations together, no, we didn't get any such direct indication. But together was a language that was used very often and approved of.
And I might add on that, but again, the process we have with the narrative workshops before we even tell people it's about climate change, of asking them about their own identity, we know that there's something strong in there because people express a sense of pride that India is so diverse. So they say, first of all, this is so diverse, we are so different in so many ways, and yet somehow we all get along. Is something which is the sense of unification of India. Now, whether it's true or not isn't the point. The important point is that that's how people identify. And it's clear, I might add on this, that this language of pulling people together, and in diversity there is strength, which I know is a motto in India, but we're finding this in other countries as well, as a key way of talking about climate change. So I'll say, no, we didn't find that, but it doesn't surprise me, actually.
Okay, thank you. A few more questions.
Please.
There have been periodic polls in India, notably Green Dex, by National Geographic and Gallup. What other research did you take into consideration for this project?
Okay. I'm just actually having a little look, and in the report, we actually have a dedicated page which is on existing research, and the biggest piece of research was actually done by the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation. Their Asian department did by far and away the largest research surveys, and they also did focus groups, but they didn't test language. So that's what makes this research, what we've done, pioneering, is what we've actually gone out and tested. But they did run focus groups. Yale University has also done a number of studies. Climate change in the Indian mind is a major piece of research that they did. If you download our report, we have links to this, and undoubtedly there are more. We tried to find out what we could, so we'd be interested to see these others. What I would say is that the vast majority of these are done as surveys, and surveys give you a kind of a snapshot of people's attitudes, but they're not very good for understanding deeper what might work, what does not work, and why people think what they think. I will say that the one thing they've shown, going back to the point Shai was saying, that they have all shown is that actually people's understanding of climate change is still weak in India. So people accept it, they know the weather's changing, they're prepared to accept that we're causing it, but actually India has a low level of understanding of what is causing it and why.
Okay, thank you. There was also a question about corruption and whether it emerged to be a determining factor in any of your discussions.
Can you come again, Leanne? You're
Yes,
very soft.
the question, sorry, was, did corruption emerge to be a determining factor in any of your discussions?
We did have the language of corruption in some narratives, and like George spoke earlier, people's reaction to any politician being mentioned was a big indicator to their this thing. So yeah, corruption featured in conversations for sure, as reported by people who ran them. But I think it was more specifically about politicians. It was not general corruption. Yeah. But
We
yeah,
did
corruption in our conversations in India. So
we did include as one of the possibilities in the narratives around renewables the presence. It didn't say corruption. It didn't really highlight corruption, but the idea that the concentration of power in large-scale energy generation created a corruption and a sort of a crony politics, and that renewables, because they distributed power, they allowed people to take control of their own power, was therefore much better. I just wanted to see if anything triggered for people, and the answer is no, it did not. This was not a very powerful or effective narrative.
Okay, thank you. I see it's almost top of the hour, so maybe one final question, which was, is there any interest in doing such a project in Brazil? And maybe I could add in other.
Our partners on this from the very beginning and raising the money for this, and just to say also, I mean, very much partners doing this together. We've been Climate Action Network International. Several countries have shown an interest in following up on this, and I understand that there has been a little interest from Brazil, but it hasn't. But amongst a number of countries that want to do this, but not enough to be able to say yes. But again, to stress, there's been some interest from colleagues in Russia, in the Middle East. When we were starting this, we were looking for potential partners. We were very excited that we could do it in India, but there was some initial interest from Tanzania and Uganda as well. So I think the next stage now that we wanted to test it, we wanted to do the pilot and to see if it works. A lot of work went into that, in designing the training materials, the packs, designing a structure that works. I think now we've got that, and we've got good feedback on that, we could roll it out to anywhere. So anyone who's listening, if you have an interest in following up on this, let's do so. The weakness, as always, is that even though this is much cheaper than doing usual research, it still costs money. So any work that we do, we would need to find a budget for.
Okay, well, thank you very much, George and Shai, and thank you for everybody who joined us and took an hour out of their busy day to learn more about the Global Narrative Project and the India Pilot Project. I will send you the recording of this webinar within the next week or so, and we'd love it if you could share it with any of your colleagues who you think might be interested but couldn't join us. And that would include the slides and the audio, so you'll have that in your inbox within a week or so. And yeah, we designed this guide to be helpful and to inform your work. And it is really great for us to hear about how people are using our work, because it just helps us, for example, with our funding applications, to show the outcome of our work and that it is helping people on the ground communicating climate change in better ways. So again, we'd love if you could share any ways that you're using this insight, whether in India or elsewhere. And yeah, thanks very much for joining us. I don't know if Shai or George would like any final words.
I'd like Shai to have a last word, Shai.
No, thank you. I really want to thank CAN International and Climate Outreach on behalf of all the participating organizations from India and CANSA. This project, I think, has just, this is really just a start. And we at CANSA, for instance, are looking forward to doing more of similar research in coming months to, develop very strong communication around climate change. So thank you all, and thank you everybody in the audience for participating. I'm sorry you couldn't see my face. I don't have the bandwidth in the rural parts of India, but thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you, Leanne and George.
Thanks, Shai.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.